Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
All right, hello and welcome everybody to the Wordy Pair Podcast. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin.
And we don't know how to start this episode, but we're going to give it a shot. Because what we're going to talk about is a sitcom. There is a sitcom, a British sitcom called Are You Being Served? That ran for several years, from the late 70s to the early 80s, along with some additional media that were related. And then there was an attempt to remake it in 2016 that fell over, much as like a mannequin would fall over during an earthquake. It was bad.
Yeah, it bombed.
Yeah,
nobody liked it.
It was pretty abysmal, and
we know,
because we just watched it. So I don't know a lot about the sitcom. I've only seen a few episodes here and there. Including the bombed 2016 reattempt, but I mean, you know, for a little bit of a synopsis, it's a pretty simple concept. You just have a group of people who work on the first floor of a department store and do some of them do men's clothing and some of them do women's clothing, and you kind of have the various comedic situations that they get into, the literal situational comedy, and sometimes they're opposed to each other, sometimes they're getting together to work against a common enemy, sometimes the difficulties are internal, sometimes they're coming from outside. So, having seen only a couple episodes, I feel like I should probably just kind of give that little synopsis, but maybe you want to fill us in a little bit more, Justin.
Well, you hit a lot of the points that I mean, it is a show that, as you mentioned before we started, it's repetitive in the sense that it is a situational comedy, and it does reuse a lot of the jokes that, they do good jokes, you get attached to them, and you kind of want to see them over and over again, and we can go over some of those in a bit.
With variations, of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what makes it. They actually, there are a few jokes where they've done so many good variations on it that almost any of them would be quotable, and someone would know what you were talking about if they had seen the show.
Exactly.
I think that there's a lot of good humor comes out of it in the sense that they will misdirect things and they will play into the characters' different personalities to try and make everything kind of almost like Naked Gun in its humor, where they just keep firing jokes at you until you have to laugh because you found something funny.
Yeah.
Sooner or later. But it's exactly the thin line between that and whatever the heck happened in the attempted revival that messed everything up.
Yeah. Well,
because they just kept firing dialogue at you, and they had canned laughter, but the canned laughter was laughing at things that I don't know if it was actually supposed to be funny.
Well, there was also the point that I think we should talk a little bit about, is that one of the things that the original show did that the remake did not do is it let a joke breathe. And
yes,
you can, if you're a very clever writer, you can come up with 100 jokes. But that doesn't mean that it is good for you to simply rattle them off as autistically quickly as you can and then call that a comedic masterpiece. Generally speaking, there's going to be a little bit of a lag between the telling of a joke and the reaction of the audience. especially subtle jokes, which this show definitely made use of. And so, like, if you're throwing out subtle jokes over and over again, you're going to need to give them a little bit of time. And if you don't do that, at the very least, people will be trying to figure out the previous joke before they figure out the one that just hit them a minute ago, and they'll start missing things. Now, this is more of a hypothetical problem, because while the remake was trying to machine gun out as many quote-unquote jokes as it could, as quickly as it could, most of the jokes were, I would say, excessively similar in content, that they just felt like, and the content was sufficiently, let's call it toilet humor, that it did kind of feel like you were cleaning out like the Aegean stables or something, trying to figure out where a joke ended and where the next one began. And none of them were funny, but smelled.
It's a total lack of timing ability, and it's not to say that they didn't have any timing whatsoever, but their timing, by comparison to the original show, they didn't understand what they were supposed to do with the jokes. So I'll give you an example.
Sure.
The reason that I even brought Are You Being Served up again the other day was that I'd been hanging out with my brother, and something reminded us of Are You Being Served, and my brother just goes, "I can mend your umbrella." And, oh, no, that's it. There's a character in Are You Being Served called Mr. Granger.
Yes.
And a commercial for Granger Industries, or whatever the tooling company is called, came onto the television. And my brother just goes, "I can mend your umbrella." And of course I knew what he was talking about. So that particular joke, there's an episode of Are You Being Served where the department store is trying to bring back the spirit of the roaring 1920s. And they're talking about music that they could play over the loudspeaker, and they make a few jokes, like Mr. Granger says, well, he always liked Bing Crosby, and then they hold on to those things. So a little later, they're talking about how they should do the music and the announcements, and Mrs. Slocum says, "Well, I always liked it when I'm shopping, and all of a sudden you hear a bing," and Mr. Granger interrupts her and goes, "Well, I said Bing Crosby." And so there's like this constant miscommunication. But that particular scene, they had been talking about music, and they changed subjects, and they got about 2 or 3 bits of dialogue into the new subject before Mr. Granger says, "I can mend your umbrella." And he's talking about the song, "I Can Mend Your Umbrella." So he's an older gentleman, and so he tends to be a little behind everyone else, and he tends to fall asleep on the job. He's a little bit, not quite senile, but elderly, and not 100% caught up with everyone at all times.
He's not an energetic person.
Yeah, not very much. So
when he is energetic, he tends to need a glass of water.
Yeah, well, that's another one of the running jokes in the show.
Yeah,
but yeah, they do that where they will make you think that this part of what they're discussing is over and they've moved on, and then they bring you right back around to it. So now they're talking about music again. That's the kind of golden comedic timing that really made this show good. And it wasn't just about the timing, though. They would have great setups for these very intricate jokes, where there was this whole thing where they all had to go into the office. They're going to see the head of the department, Mr. Rumbold. Yeah. And they're trying to explain to him this falling out that the two sides of the departments are having. And there's all these tiny things that happened before you get to this part of the show. You've got Captain Peacock, the head of the floor, is wiggling a finger at Mrs. Slocum, telling her, "Come here." And she's already angry, so she didn't want to. And so she kind of flipped him the 2-finger salute. And there was just a bunch of dialogue that happened that led up to this moment where, after hearing the entire story, Mr. Rumbold, he says, "Okay, I think I understand what happened here. It sounds like this is all a misunderstanding." So he interprets the story as Mrs. Slocum had said that that Captain Peacock's wiggling finger got right up her nose. So he says, okay, so you were trying to stick your finger up her nose, so naturally she took 2 fingers and stuck them up to protect her nose from your probing digits.
Yes.
And everyone just kind of looking at him as he goes on about what he thinks happened for almost 25 seconds in this scene, getting an entirely ridiculous interpretation of all the events. And the end result is that you have sat there and watched all of these people just flabbergasted, listening to him going on and on and on. And in his head, he thinks he has 100% nailed this. And they are so blown away by this that nobody bothers to argue anymore. They're just like, all right, we're just going to go next scene. And that's it. It's all taken care of.
You've solved the problem by your ineptitude.
Yeah, it's really, really good joke setups that you don't know exactly how much of what they're showing you is important until you get to the point where someone is like, okay, here's how all these elements combined, only that person is wrong. And that also is a running joke where he would always misinterpret events in some ridiculous way, but he would say it with the confidence of a department supervisor.
Right.
And that was kind of his character quirk. Like Mr. Granger has the semi-senility. Mr. Rumbold has that kind of innocent, old school department head. Just let's try to work out all of our differences.
Yeah.
Captain Peacock is a very aloof floor walker is his title. His official job is to be the head of the department on the floor, whereas Mr. Rumbold is the head in the office. And he basically does walk the floor, find out what the customers want, and send them to the right people. He's Captain Peacock because he was in the military, but they make it a running joke that nobody actually knows if he was actually a captain in the military or if he just made that up.
Okay, fair enough.
You've got Mrs. Slocum, who is the head of the ladies department, and she's an older woman, but she's always got these flamboyant hair colors in her twisted hairstyle that she has all the time.
Yeah.
She goes from having pink to purple to, in one episode, she had red, white, and blue hair. She has a cat. That's part of her personality trait, believe it or not. One of the running jokes in the show is that she always refers to her cat as her pussy.
Right.
So a lot of jokes, as you can imagine, come out of that. Her junior department member is Miss Brahms, who for 20 years I thought her name was Miss Browns, Browns, until I saw a captioned version one time, and I was like, this whole time it was Miss Brahms? Her personality is kind of like she's a younger woman, so she likes to occasionally go out and have a bit of fun, but she also doesn't like all the advances of the one young man that's usually on the in the men's department. They go through a cast of characters several times, but the mainstays of the show were pretty much always Captain Peacock, Mr. Rumbold, Mrs. Slocum, Miss Brahms, and a character called Mr. Humphrey, who was there were 3 people in the men's department usually.
Right.
So you had the senior assistant was Mr. Granger. I guess the middle, what did they call the middle assistant? Well, he was Mr. Humphreys.
Right.
And then the junior assistant, who at the beginning of the show, I believe, was Mr. Lucas.
Yes.
And the position of Mr. Humphreys was one of always usually there to assist Mr. Granger. He's a little bit older, and he's a very flamboyant person. They don't ever, I think, directly say that he's gay, but it's very obvious. And judging by the way that he talks with everyone, they make it obvious that, yes, of course he's gay, but he's very flamboyantly so, which is what really makes him entertaining.
Right.
There are entire episodes where he will do things like show up wearing he shows up wearing a sailor's outfit at one point, and Captain Peacock, like a Navy sailor, and Captain Peacock questions him about this.
Right.
Says, why are you not in uniform, and do I even want to know? And he says, oh, I was at a party. And of course, that usually gets the canned audience laughter, which it's actually a real audience in this version. But the jokes are always one touch funnier than they should be, because it's not just that he was at a party dressed as a sailor, but it's that he left the party and he was able to get rides to work to be on time because he was dressed as a sailor and people thought that he was with the military. So there's always like an extra explanation that he gives that makes his appearance in those scenarios even funnier. They tried to do that in the newer version where the guy playing Mr. Humphreys, who didn't quite capture the flamboyance as well as, what was it, John Inman, I think was his name?
Yes, John Inman, that's right.
Yeah, he did a fantastic job of portraying that character. I have no idea if because I've seen him on the PBS money drives, and he talks the same in real life as he does in that show. And I don't know how much of the character is actually him, but if it's not, he's a tremendous actor for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Then usually, like you've got Mr. Lucas is the young junior assistant in the show, and he's kind of, well, I mean, he's a lady chaser to begin with, but of course that means he's always after Miss Brahms in one fashion or another.
Right.
He's
or
a wisecracker.
Whoever happens to be showing up in that episode.
Yeah, pretty much.
Because one of the ones that I saw was the one where they set up the perfume display in the center of the center.
Yeah.
So, there was a bit of humorous back and forth about the woman who had been hired to run that perfume display and how she was interfering with all of their work and their sales, and then the stuff that they tried to do to get back at her and to kind of scare her away. Basically, it was a pretty funny episode.
Yeah, I kind of liked the solution that Mr. Lucas came up with, where he sabotaged the equipment and made it really offensive to the people that were shopping there.
Right.
Only for it to, of course, because it's British comedy, you don't. I forget, I believe it was, oh geez, what was his name? Famous British actor and comedian, worked with Hugh Laurie in Jeeves and Wooster and a lot of other things. Stephen Fry. I think it was Stephen Fry who had a comedy act where he talked about the differences between British comedy and American comedy, and he called American comedy the lead actor of the movie is usually the guy with the biggest dick in the room, essentially. Whereas British comedy is all about one man's failure in most aspects. You're usually you're never the winner in British comedy. Your character is always going to suffer at the end of it.
Blackadder.
Yeah, essentially. and of course Jeeves and Wooster. It's either Jeeves and Wooster or Wooster and Jeeves. I can never remember, but that was a great show with Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie.
Yeah.
Which we may have to discuss that one day, but it's just worth pointing out, since we brought up Hugh Laurie, that I loved the fact that he did that award ceremony when he won whatever award it was for his work on House. And he goes up to the podium and starts talking, and people start laughing because they think he's playing around. Nobody ever knew that he was actually a British actor. So when he had the accent, everyone thought he was just joking around. But yeah, all the shows are pretty much like that. Fawlty Towers, no matter how well laid a plan you have, as Basil Fawlty, in the end, something screws you over, whether it's your own fault or not.
Yeah.
And it is a running theme. So in Are You Being Served, it's usually there too. Like every once in a while, the team will get a win. A lot of times it's in a way that they don't like, but sometimes it's a genuine win. I do remember a few, like, they had fought to not have to waste time on their breaks going back and forth to the canteen.
Right.
They had a union in the show, and there's this union steward that's kind of a running character. He's played by 3 different actors throughout the show, playing 3 different characters with 3 different names that are essentially the same character.
Mm-hmm.
And he gets them to make a big union to-do about how their breaks work, going so far as to saying that your break shouldn't start when you clock out, it shouldn't start when you go into the lift, it shouldn't start when you get to the canteen, it should start when you dip your biscuit in the tea.
Right.
And that's kind of what they were going with. And they end up winning this fight at the end, where Mr. Grace, who I'll get to in a moment, he comes out of the elevator.
Young Mr. Grace.
Yes, young Mr. Grace. He comes out of the elevator for their floor, and he starts talking to everyone, says he agrees that they shouldn't have to start their breaks until they're actually seated where they're taking their break. And he says, and I have my tea and biscuits brought right to my office, and if it's good enough for me, it's good enough for the rest of you. So I will now be delivering your tea and biscuits to you on the floor, so you don't have to waste time walking back and forth to the canteen. And then he leaves, and for a moment, everyone kind of feels like they got their victory, but then they start to sort of look sad, and Mrs. Slocum is like, well, I'm going to miss my little chats in the elevator on the way to the canteen. And like everyone's got a reason to not actually like it at the end.
Right.
So it's the whole show coming up to just set up a victory that is somehow still within the jaws of defeat.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, so any interjections before I continue my long-winded discussion of this show that I love?
Well, I just thought that I thought that it would be helpful to put this into perspective, because this is one of those things where I've only seen a couple of episodes, but we do have a fairly good source for how good of a comedy this is. Because back in, I believe, 2006, there was actually a documentary series on BBC Two called Britain's Best Sitcom. And they judged 100 sitcoms and ranked them. And Are You Being Served came in at a respectable number 20. Now, number 20 might sound, we're Americans here. We might say, well, 20, how many British sitcoms are there?
There's a lot of good ones, so I can see it being 20.
So here's the thing. It is, of course, behind Blackadder. It's behind Fawlty Towers. It's behind Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. It's behind Father Ted. It's behind Keeping Up Appearances. It's behind Absolutely Fabulous. It's behind Red Dwarf. But, it is ahead of The Office. So, to people who, hem and haw and breathe in awe of The Office, the British people put The Office at 25, and Are You Being Served at 20. So there's definitely, there's definitely something to this series. Whether I've experienced it yet myself or not is yet to be seen. But there's definitely something going on here, and it did go on for, I believe, 8 series, or we would call them here seasons, basically. So yeah, there's a lot of material to look through.
Yeah, and I mean, it's definitely worthy of a place above The Office. I've only seen a little bit of The Office, and it's got its uniqueness about it, but hands down, I would have said that Are You Being Served was a better show than that, too. So I fully agree with the British community on this one.
It's one of those things where Are You Being Served started in the 70s, right? And so it's very likely that people who are, around today watching sitcoms have just never had the opportunity to see it, Whereas The Office was 2001 through 2002, and a lot of people today talk about how great that series was. And it was good enough that there was even, an American version that was created that, people will, bicker over which one was better. But, I mean, if this one is 5 slots ahead of the British Office, I'd say there's got to be something to it.
Yeah, and a lot of the shows you named, they all had that sort of charm to them that made them great British television. Like the likes of which we have not seen since those shows were on television. I mean, you had a couple that had great starts and kind of bombed out at the end. Like Chef is one of my favorite shows of all time. And it had one really stupendous season, one great second season, and then the third season, I don't know what writers took over.
I don't know what the hell happened, but yeah.
Like up to and including a scene where Lenny Henry is dancing on his boss's desk with nothing but his chef's toque covering his front side, completely in the buff.
Oh.
And at that point, it's just like, what happened to this show? We will talk about Chef one day.
A little too much unprocessed Stilton.
Yeah. So I did show you that show.
Yes.
Yeah, that's yeah, boy, I was disappointed in that third season when I finally got around to watching it. I was like, is this the same show?
Mm-hmm.
But that was later 90s, so television was already taking a turn for the worse by that point, I think. It wasn't bad by that point, but it was starting that downhill trajectory where it's like, we're never going to see good television again, are we? And then we had a brief respite in like 2005 when they tried to bring back Doctor Who and succeeded wildly, and then murdered that success.
Yeah.
In cold blood in front of millions and millions of... Well, anyway, Are You Being Served is a fantastic show, and there's a couple of things that are worth knowing about it before we get to the attempted revival.
Yeah.
So one more thing about the characters is young Mr. Grace himself. In the show, in the pilot, young Mr. Grace is introduced by coming out of an elevator, and I believe it's Captain Peacock that says, "Everybody, young Mr. Grace is on the floor now," and they all turn to look, and Mr. Lucas has just started this job, and he looks over and he's like, "That's young Mr. Grace." It's this 80-year-old man who needs his chauffeur's help to stay standing up, even with the cane that he's got. And he gets help down the stairs, and he walks by, and Mr. Humphreys turns to Mr. Lucas and says, "Old Mr. Grace doesn't get about very much." So,
yeah.
So that's the running joke. Which, holy cow, did they screw that one up in the remake? But we'll get there. Because young Mr. Grace is a character in and of itself. I mean, he owns the store. He makes a lot of jokes throughout the show about how rich he is and and the fact that he owns the store.
Yeah.
And his character is one of, well, I'm just going to do what I'm doing, and he never really worries about what anyone thinks about it because he's too old to worry about anything.
And too rich to give a damn.
Well, there's that, yeah, but I think the thing that really tops everything off is the man is like an 88-year-old. Oh, what's the word? I think the word horn dog is appropriate here.
Okay.
He's a bit perverted, not in every joke he makes, but a lot of the times the jokes are things like, he always has a very young secretary, and there will be scenes in the show where maybe they'll be doing something like taking his blood pressure. Like he'll have a nurse that's in a tiny skirt and high heels, and she's taking his blood pressure. And the show does actually make you question whether she's a legitimate nurse or not, because oftentimes the woman playing these characters she'll be playing the role of a bimbo who doesn't quite understand what's going on around her. So he's getting his blood pressure taken, and the nurse will get up and go to like plug in a piece of her equipment, and somehow this will always mean that she has to bend over in front of her desk, and then all of a sudden Mr. Grace will start patting his heart and the machine will start beeping. It's just almost every episode where he appears with a secretary, there's a joke like that. Secretary, nurse, whatever. And when that's not happening, there's a lot of jokes where he isn't paying attention because he's too busy staring at his secretary. A lot of things happen that there's an entire episode where they do a beauty contest. The entire department is trying to enter this beauty contest because the winner is their department is going to get a free trip on Mr. Grace's yacht. And they're kind of like, they've got Mrs. Slocum and Miss Brahms. Miss Brahms is one of the possible shoo-ins for winning it. Obviously, Mrs. Slocum enters the contest despite everyone not wanting her to, and of course, it doesn't work out. But she's the bigger, older woman with the funny hair, and she tries to be way sexier than she possibly can in the context of her character. But they've got a backup plan in case all else fails, because Miss Brahms is not into the idea of Mr. Grace having his hands all over her, or just being on a yacht with him. She finds him a creepy old man. So their backup plan is to get Mr. Humphreys into a dress, which and he does end up winning that contest, which really complicates things going forward.
Yeah.
But I bring that one up specifically just because I did mention that he was on one of the money drives for PBS at one point, and he talked specifically about that episode and how it took the entire cast to get him into that dress. And at one point, I forget the name of the guy that plays Captain Peacock, but he's like, I guess it was him or maybe it was the guy playing Mr. Lucas, had his foot on his back and was pulling backward on the dress, trying to get his arms to slide into it. It was a pretty funny story. I don't remember it too well because I think I was like I was like 12 or 13 when I saw it, but it was pretty funny. And there's a lot of great moments like that throughout the show where they're trying to do something like win a contest or solve a problem or figure out how to swindle the Arabs out of money. Yes, you heard that right. There's an episode where they're in the department store, and because of energy, there must have been some energy thing going on in the UK at the time because they were talking about cutting costs and they had the heat turned off. And part of the plot of it was that Mr. Rumbold was in his office and he was, wagging his finger at everyone saying they got to do their part, but he secretly had a plug-in heater in his office, which ultimately led to a fire breaking out later on, and everyone sort of, giving him the stink eye when they found out why.
Yeah.
But again, Mr. Grace comes along in this episode, and
young Mr. Grace.
Young Mr. Grace comes along. You never see old Mr. Grace. You only ever see young Mr. Grace. Young Mr. Grace comes along, and he tells everyone, well, they can stop worrying. He's solved the problem. And so they're all happy. They're all like, all right, well, no problem. And, like, what do we do? Turn the heat back on? He's like, no, we can run the boilers all month long if you want. Apparently he had another business. Their union was on strike, so he closed it down, and he had the building demolished, and they were going to use the wood from the building to run the boilers at Grace Brothers department store. That was his grand solution. He says it with a big smile on his face, nearly falls over doing his little catch line whenever he shows up at the show. As he departs, he will turn around, raise his cane up in the air, and say, "You've all done very well." But he usually falls over while trying to say it, so his chauffeur has to catch him, and then they walk off. This is the character of Mr. Grace, in a nutshell.
Young Mr. Grace.
Yes, young Mr. Grace. We don't know old Mr. Grace's character, but I bet he's not very outgoing with it, whatever it is.
Well, clearly, he has trouble getting around at this point.
Yeah, and of course, young Mr. Grace is also very old, so there will be a lot of jokes in the show, such as when Mr. Granger got fired, or rather he resigned accidentally, and so to come back he had to reapply as a junior. And they're in a meeting with Mr. Grace, and Mr. Grace hears him referred to as a junior. He says, "He's been with us for 60 years and he's still a junior? We should have fired him a long time ago." It's a very... If you've ever seen any British comedy at all, it's the most British comedy I can think of. And there's a lot of good British comedy. I mean, you mentioned Keeping Up Appearances. That's actually also one of my favorites. It's kind of in the running neck and neck for whether I like that one or Are You Being Served more, but Keeping Up Appearances might have had more ridiculous situations for the characters even than Are You Being Served. And, we can save that for another discussion. It looks like we still got a fair bit of time here, but we do want to kind of talk about the attempted revival.
So one of the good things about the show that I've seen so far is timing. They actually do a very good job of making sure not only that lines are delivered with the proper pacing and the proper timing, but also that, they don't start in with something new when they're just finishing up something else. And of course, one of the things that I saw in the old episodes of the show that is kind of a double-edged sword is that jokes would proceed along like similar topics, which means that you can reduce the amount of time that you need to take between jokes, just because this joke is similar in topic to the previous joke, and so people are kind of primed for it. But at the same time, it means that the topic of the jokes is a little bit more straight-laced or tunnel vision-y. But yeah, the remake. Let's talk about that disaster.
I guess the opening of the remake summed it up a lot for me before we watched it the other day, because I had brought it to your attention and we sat down to watch it, and I had never seen past the first 3 minutes of the episode because I was immediately turned away by the character playing Mr. Humphreys. He failed in every respect to capture the flamboyance and subtlety that Mr. Humphreys was able to portray in his character, where he would weasel his way into getting on a customer's good side. He's a very sweet talker. Not maliciously so, but...
smooth talker.
Yeah, he does know how to get the customer to take an interest in whatever it is that they're planning on buying, or even to sell them something they might not be looking for.
You might even say he's deft of tongue.
Yes, very much. And in the beginning of this episode, the first thing you see is him step out from behind a counter, raise a hand up, doing the flamboyant Mr. Humphries thing from the old show, and
Sure.
saying "stop" in an overly dramatic way. So they
So original Mr. Humphries was not over dramatic.
Well, not usually. In some of the
Not
when
usually.
he was
I mean,
part of a joke,
in what
be.
I've seen, right? There would be occasional joke bits where he would kind of turn it up a little bit, but in general, he was pretty subdued about his just as a character. He didn't jump out in that way. He was kind of willing to be almost the second figure in the joke, kind of half facilitator, half straight man.
Yeah. I see what you did there.
Uh-huh.
So this character, this new Mr. Humphries, there's a gentleman that steps out onto the floor in a suit, and he's standing in front of a mirror adjusting his tie. And right. Mr. Humphries steps out, and he starts playing the complimenting the suit and saying that it really works for this other person. And that was kind of a thing that Mr. Humphries did in the old show, except it was being approached from the aspect of, we know that Mr. Humphries is flamboyant. We know that he does weird things like dressing up in lavish outfits and going to parties on his nights off. He also, the running joke in the show is that he lives with his mother, which did not come up in the new show at all. But he lives with his mother, and oh no, actually it did, didn't it? Yeah, it did come up in the show, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
So he's always talking about things he's doing for his mother. Like occasionally he'll come in and I think he had a handbag in one episode, and there was a reason he was carrying it in because his mother needed something.
Oh yeah, there was one episode that I saw where he was breaking in his mother's shoes.
Yeah, I think that was was that the pilot?
It wasn't the maybe.
Anyway, he does stuff like that. But yeah. So you get the idea that, okay, so Mr. Humphries does have this kind of a thing about appearances to a degree, where he does have a grasp of fashion. He works in a department store. He does have the ability to sell customers things that might fit with them.
Yeah.
And he's doing this to the character that is coming in as the new junior assistant, and he doesn't know that yet. That's supposed to be the joke. But they never actually land that joke. Like, it's not funny when you find out that he's there. And they mess the joke up because the joke is supposed to be, well, this is my suit. You're trying to sell me my suit. I came into work today. But they repeat it about 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
Both to 2 separate characters and to the audience. So by the time the 4th time comes around, you're like, why? They don't have to tell me this. I get it. It's... And it's even funnier because it's like, aren't they listening to him? He told them that it's his, and he said it in a way that everyone should have understood. There wasn't like a joke where it could have been misinterpreted. It was said in a very concise fashion. This is my suit. But they continued as if there had been a joke where he didn't say it in a way that made sense that it was his suit. So they kept trying to sell him his own suit. That didn't happen. And so you're just stuck with this poor delivery. And that's the opening of the show, and that's like the first real joke of the show. I mean, they had canned laughter when Mr. Humphries stood up and said stop at the beginning because he did it in such a flamboyant way.
Right.
But first off, I suspect they weren't filming in front of a studio audience, and second off, I mean, there's no reason to laugh at it.
Right. Well, I mean, there's the reason of nostalgia, which might be a thing, but I mean, it was fairly clear from the way that the canned laughter was going that it was canned laughter in the show, because it would just like appear and you'd be like, wait, what? Did someone turn the knob at the wrong time? Or
yeah, because they kept laughing at the suit thing, and the suit thing was never funny to begin with, plus it went on way too long. So
right.
Yeah, there should have, I mean, unless they hold their audiences hostage and they point guns at them and say, you better laugh when we tell you to laugh. They got like a flashing sign that says "Laugh or Die."
I just watched V for Vendetta, so that's a possibility.
That is a possibility. Yes, it's like the network for Are You Being Served? So So that's, I mean, you have this sour opening. I don't even remember what most of the quote unquote jokes are supposed to be, because nothing was really funny. There was like one joke I think that I said was kind of funny, but I don't even remember what it was.
Well, the problem was that they were just machine gunning them too quickly at me. I was just like, oh, was that supposed to be funny? Oh, what's this next thing he's saying? Oh, was that supposed to be? Oh, what's he saying now? I mean, there was no. And when I say this, I mean like genuinely. I was to the point where like I was like, please stop and let me hear what you're saying before you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, it wasn't. It didn't have any cadence to it, and so there was no reason to really. A joke is supposed to leave you with that. You're either supposed to laugh immediately because it's an obvious joke and it's funny, or
Sure.
you're supposed to be like, oh, wait a minute, what they just did there that almost passed me by, that was also funny, and so I'm supposed to laugh at that. It didn't do that. You're right. It was machine gun. It suffered from the same problem that the new Mystery Science Theater had, where they were machine gunning jokes at you. To the point of you, like in Mystery Science Theater, there's a reason you have to not do that, because you're watching a movie in the background of watching people make fun of it.
Right.
And so if they machine gun the jokes at you, you either don't see the movie or you don't catch the jokes. And those two things kind of have to go hand in hand for Mystery Science Theater to work.
Well, it's also true that, like, in the case of Mystery Science Theater 3000, it's not true. It is probably true that you could take every moment of one of these crappy movies and come up with a joke. But there's also kind of an art to making the jokes be the more obvious ones and saying, well, we'll have to leave that one off because it would, it's not likely that they would have kind of thought of this, while they were watching the movie. We'll have a couple of those, but if we're just like poking at every single little thing, then we're also kind of devaluing the more funny parts of the movie by, making fun of them the same as we make fun of just the normal parts.
Yeah. Yeah, and the new Are You Being Served really, really suffered from that. I don't recall, I don't really recall what was going on in there was this loose plot of we're going to drag this company into the 80s, and the joke
there's a joke there, but it's not a very good joke. Is that this remake is taking place in 1988, and they're like, oh, well, we gotta, drag the store into the present day, but the present day is still 20-some years behind what present day is for the viewer.
Yeah, because when was that reboot? It was like 2010 or something?
2016, I think.
2016? Yeah, and
nearly 30 years.
They wanted to go back. Yeah, they wanted to go back to the 80s when it took place because, well, I mean, where do you even see department stores these days? So obviously that they kind of had to do something like that to keep with that theme, unless they wanted to make it about a Starbucks or something.
Yeah.
They made the joke in the show. Mr. Rumbold, the person playing Mr. Rumbold, makes the joke that young Mr. Grace, again, we'll get to that, wants to drag this company kicking and screaming into the 80s. And he says, and it's a good thing, too, because we're almost in the 90s. And it's important to point out that the reason this is happening is that they have swapped out the geriatric owner of the company, Mr. Grace, who, by this time, even in the actual show, would have been dead.
Right.
With a very young, up-and-coming son of or grandson or son, I believe, of Mr. Grace.
It would have to be a grandson, goodness.
And
either that or a very late son.
Yeah, but he's playing this character that's almost like an evil villain, like your typical, I'm the head of the company and I'm going to put my foot down about everything, and if you don't follow orders, you're fired.
Right.
It was a complete departure from the quirky and entertaining character of the young Mr. Grace of old.
Right.
Where he might have had the attitude that it's his business and he'll do what he wants, but he's not out to get you. That was never part of his character in the show.
Sure.
And to introduce I mean, this guy was like, I'm trying to think of who he reminded me of. Sort of what was his name from John Stamos from Full House? Is that who I'm thinking of?
Uncle Jesse?
Yeah, like with the hair and kind of had that look to him, but he also had like the attitude of a mafioso.
Okay. I mean, I don't think that Uncle Jesse had we'll have to discuss the full lore of Full House at some point, but like,
Will we?
no, we don't. But
I mean, I would much rather
I-
discuss the full lore of America's Funniest Videos than the full lore of Full
well,
House.
yeah, sure. But like, I mean, I never got that impression from Full House. But I mean, this is of course a different character. But you're saying he's slick, right? Something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah.
He's like a sleazy car salesman.
Yeah, there you go.
Instead of being an old man who was once a fishmonger who decided to open a department store and made it a success, and
Right.
still pops in to keep an eye on things, even though he could be off on his yacht if he wanted to. So it kind of, I mean, that was like a really, really like down part of the show where you're supposed to be watching these shows and be like cheery and entertained even when things aren't going well for everyone. But here it's just like, oh, everything sucks at the store, and these people are like just scared for their jobs. And
Well, it's worth noting that like in the original show, there's not really any malice anywhere. There's some sarcasm and there's some friendly poking fun at someone kind of thing, but there's no genuine like grimdark malice happening in the show.
Yeah.
Whereas if we start to make this into the oh so popular criticism of late stage capitalism, then well, it's not going to be the same show, and it's probably not going to be funny either.
Well, it wasn't. So there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, do you know how far the humor went in the original Are You Being Served? I'm going to tell you something that to this day I'm just like, wow, that is hilarious that they did that.
Go for it.
There was an episode where the Queen was going to come and visit Grace Brothers. And it's like the Queen and I don't know, it was Prince Harry or Prince Charles. It was being announced on the news. Of course, they weren't actually in the show.
Yeah.
And as they're approaching the store, they came in once before, apparently, but they hadn't been there in a very long time. And so everyone was getting prepared just for the event of if they came to the store. They were practicing how they were going to greet everyone. There were a lot of jokes about, like, Mr. Granger, I believe, was trying to roll down the red carpet, and he couldn't do it. And so they were like, oh, they were making jokes about how the Queen was just going to have to wait for him, I guess, or something like that. A lot of jokes where it would be an inconvenience to the royalty, but they were all like gung ho about getting it done and doing it proper.
Sure.
And you know what ends up happening? You're gonna love this.
Yeah, go for it.
They go up to I think they went to Mr. Rumbold's office.
Okay.
To see if they could have a look at the Queen, because it turned out, according to the news announcement they were listening to, it looked like she was going to come into the store. And so they were all going to the window and listening to the radio to watch as she's coming down the street. And I think it was Mrs. Slocum or Miss Brown. Someone reached their hand out to point.
Yeah.
And knocked a flower pot out of a window.
Oh no.
And it nearly, according to the newscaster, it seems something has fallen from the window and nearly struck Prince Harry, and now the royal family is running back to their car. and so they make this joke about almost killing Prince Harry on a British television show on the BBC, and I feel like they wouldn't be able to do that these days in good taste like that show did it, because that was genuinely funny. It was in good taste because they weren't making any political commentary about it. If they did it today, it would be in brute force political commentary, because that's just the times we're in. And also the monarchy in Britain has become such a silly figurehead thing to most of the British people that nobody would even really care anyway. Like I get from the libertarian perspective, of course, I understand that, well, do we really need a monarchy, a single person at the helm directing things, which the monarchy hasn't been in forever. It really is a figure of state ever since they introduced their weird parliamentary system that never gets anything done.
No, yeah.
But there's still something to be said for history and tradition, no matter what perspective you come from, and for everyone to just kind of, I can understand, like, they're just other people. It doesn't matter. They're not special, but the institution that everything was built on in that country should be viewed as, hey, we got this far as the human race. This is kind of special. We shouldn't forget that it happens.
Sure.
So I don't think that they would really treat it the same on television these days. I think that it would just be a thing of mockery for for that particular institution, or as Doctor Who often did, a thing of complete loyalty to the institution.
Yeah.
So yeah, Are You Being Served? They really nailed it. Not only did they nail it, but they talked about the attempted murder of one of the royal family as a joke on their show.
And they even managed to make it not malicious. It's like, oops, let's remember that. Goodness, there were 10 series of Are You Being Served, with anywhere from 5 to 9 episodes in a single series. Total number of episodes, little over 70 episodes, plus a special and a film. And there was an actual, like, not reboot, but like spin-off that involved them all going to work on a farm, which was called Grace and Favor Everywhere Except the United States and Canada, where it was called Are You Being Served Again? I guess we needed that extra little bit of non-subtlety.
Well, it was on PBS, and they were kind of pushing to keep, because PBS had Are You Being Served was a very successful show on PBS. It's where most Americans saw the show.
Sure.
And they really wanted to keep the fire going, and so they advertised it really heavily to begin with, and then just completely forgot about it after that, because I don't know if it did well in Britain. It didn't have that many seasons, if it had more than one.
It had looks like possibly 1 or 2.
Yeah,
Series 1, Series 2. Total of 12 episodes.
Yeah, there weren't that many episodes, so it had the same kind of sense of humor. It had the same charm to it. It was just the characters on a farm instead of being in a department store. So they got to tell different jokes, but essentially creating the same weird situations. And they also, for that series, they brought back Mr. Lucas, who was the original junior assistant in the first couple seasons.
Yeah.
He was later replaced by a British pop singer, I believe, who they ended up calling Mr. Oh, geez, what did they call him? He was not as funny, in my opinion, as Mr. Lucas, but he was still good at the job.
Mm-hmm.
And why can't I remember what he was called? Oh, whatever it was, there was that actor. He stuck around for, I think, the rest of the show.
Okay.
And then they had 2 replacements. I believe maybe 3 replacements for Mr. Granger. Eventually left the show, and he was replaced by an older gentleman who apparently came from the bathroom department called Mr. Tibbs. And he was always really proud of his record-breaking toilet sales. And then he ended up being replaced by a character called Mr. Harmon, Mr. Goldberg, not Mr. Harmon. Mr. Harmon was the janitor / union steward of the show.
Yeah.
Mr. Goldberg was the new replacement for the senior sales staff. He came in as a junior. Captain Peacock did not want him around because they had apparently served in the military forever, and this guy knew that Captain Peacock wasn't really a captain. Or at least he claimed that he wasn't really a captain. That ended up being a linchpin for getting him to not be fired, was that he agreed to not tell anyone about anything he knew about Captain Peacock, so Captain Peacock went to bat for him. But this particular character, his story was that he actually owned a successful department store himself, but it burned to the ground, and he came in looking for work as a junior sales assistant, was incredible at the job, to the point that they went to Mr. Rumbold's office and said, look, we know he just started, and this is like Mr. Humphreys is in the office telling him, we know he just started, but he belongs in the senior position. And then they find out that he had his own store, and he had all these customers from the store that the minute they heard he was working there, even as a junior, they came flocking to Grace Brothers. So he had all these potential sales behind him, all this, what do they call it in real estate? Leads. He had all these leads that were regular customers that would keep coming back, and they're just like, yeah, give him the position. He deserves it. So they make him the senior assistant at the end of that episode, and I believe he is maybe the character that is the senior assistant for the rest of the show. There might have been one more who wasn't around for very long. But I vaguely remember there were like 2 at the end that were skinnier older guys, but I can't remember what exactly their names were.
Mm-hmm.
So there might have been one other person besides Mr. Goldberg. And that was pretty much the cast of characters. Mr. Grace was actually replaced. The guy that played young Mr. Grace eventually couldn't do it anymore, or I think maybe he died. He was a very old guy.
Yeah.
They found another old actor that was right about that age as well, and he came in as the brother of Mr. Grace. So again, he was young Mr. Grace, and it was still Grace Brothers Department Store. And he was pretty much the same character, a little more shrewd than his brother, where he did have some of that attitude of, all right, well, we're just going to do things my way, and I really don't care what anyone thinks about it. But he would be a bit more combative about it if he thought anyone was arguing. Whereas the original actor for Mr. Grace would say things like, oh, at one point they were talking about the similarities between characters, and Mr. Granger and Mr. Grace were talking to each other. And Mr. Grace makes this joke where he goes, well, there's one very big difference between you and me, Mr. Granger. And Mr. Granger goes, what's that? And he goes, I own the store. It's just I don't remember what the setup for that joke was, but it landed well when it landed. So it's worth watching that show to pick some of these jokes up.
Yeah, well, I mean, they insinuate themselves. There's you start to kind of pick up on them, and then they become running gags that you kind of participate in yourself.
Yeah, they're like the comfort food of jokes when you get good running gags like that. So we can go through a couple of them. One of them is,
are you free?
Yes. Captain Peacock, being the floor walker, will often encounter a customer who needs assistance usually in the men's department is where they do this joke. They don't usually do it with the ladies department.
Right.
It might have happened once or twice, but for the most part, Captain Peacock would say something like, Mr. Humphreys, are you free? Or Mr. Granger, are you free? And the character he's addressing would look over both shoulders when there's clearly no one there and be like, I'm free,
right.
and then come and assist the customer. That was a running gag from the pilot episode going forward.
Yeah.
And then there's just a ton, especially as they got further into the show. Mrs. Slocum would make more and more jokes about her cat, and they got more inventive as the show went on. To the point where she's talking about having a mailman wave a sardine in front of the mail slot to entice her pussy. and everyone in the show knows what she's talking about, and so just listens like they don't even notice what she's saying. And then every once in a while there'll be some joke about where someone overhears her and doesn't understand, and you get like an eye roll or something, like an exasperate, or I guess more flabbergasted expression.
Yeah.
And there's Mr. Humphreys has a running joke that happens a lot. It never really changes because it's the same joke every time, but for some reason they always waited just long enough episode to episode to do it. Where they would just throw it out after you've forgotten about it. The phone would ring in the men's department, and Mr. Humphreys always answered it by picking up and going, menswear, in the deepest voice he could do, despite the fact that he has a very shrill, high, flamboyant voice.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who he sounds like. I really can't think of anyone to compare it to. I mean, he's the one I think of when I try to think of that kind of character.
Yeah.
And it's not like cracking up funny, but it's usually funny every single time because you don't even catch it at first. You're like, oh, he picks up the phone, and just as he's starting to say it, you're like, oh, right, he's gonna do the thing with his voice.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, then it's usually someone he knows, so he goes right back to his normal voice.
Right.
Let's see, what other running jokes? They refer to Mr. Rumbold as Old Jug Ears, which you couldn't do in the new show because the joke was that the actor playing him had these giant ears and a bald head, so it made his ears look like they stuck out like a jug.
Well, his ears did stick out, too. He had those glasses on that pulled them forward.
Yeah, well, they didn't, the new actor did not have ears that stuck out nearly as much as the old.
No, I mean, you can't get away with jokes like that as much anymore. You have to actually have some kind of wherewithal that most people don't have anymore to pull off those kinds of jokes.
Yeah. It's
just a straight appearance joke, because some people get very, very sensitive about these things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just that they get sensitive, but they get sensitive on behalf of other people who are fictional characters.
Yeah. Tarts, usually.
Well, sure.
Probably people with big ears as well.
I mean, there's all kinds
Buddha
of...
crowd, you know.
Sure.
Was that tactful enough? Did I do it tactfully?
I think it was too nonsensical to be untactful.
I could have machine gun fired him instead. I don't think that.
I mean, I can cut the pauses out between them, so it sounds like you did, but I probably won't.
Yeah. But these are, of course, there were a lot of jokes about Mr. Humphries, because a lot of the jokes would involve, especially like Mr. Lucas would often take something Mr. Humphries said out of context and make a crack about it, because obviously he's gay. And so sometimes Mr. Humphries would be talking about someone he knows, and Mr. Lucas would just assume that it's a he, and that was also one of the not very often running gags, but every once in a while he would do that, and Mr. Humphries would just be like, "What makes you think it was a man?" Or "What makes you think it wasn't a woman?"
Right.
A lot of fun jokes like that, where Mr. Humphries will start to tell a story, and it'll look like it's going in one direction because you're assuming that he's talking about something at like a gay club or something, and then he'll bring it entirely around to something like a golf tournament or whatever.
Sure. Well, I mean, part of the humor there is the ambiguity, right? Like,
yeah, because they never explicitly say that he's gay in the show.
Well, it's like if Ace and Gary were the totally obviously gay duo, it wouldn't be as funny either.
Yeah. I mean, in Mr. Humphrey's case, between all the things that are said in the show, it is 100% obvious. Yes, he is gay. I mean, he does make comments about things that would be fun to do. I wish I could remember some of them. There's a lot of good jokes where someone will say something about, like, oh, there's a fireman episode where Miss Brahms is in an argument about they're staying over at the department store.
Yeah.
And
again.
Yeah, there's a couple times it happened. Was it the fire rescue? Oh yeah, they decided to stay over because of a storm. And so they got tents from the camping department, and they were camping out on the department floor. And Miss Brahms tells everyone not to come into her tent because she sleeps naked. And Captain Peacock says, "Well, what if there was a fire?" And she goes, "Oh, I'd be the first one to be rescued."
Uh-huh.
It's jokes like that, but in Mr. Humphrey's case, usually the implication will be that you're expecting at that, especially at that time period, the joke is kind of setting up that it would be a woman that would want something like that to happen, and then Mr. Humphreys would just kind of give a quick smile and be like, "Oh, that sounds like that would be a fun way to spend the day," or something like that. It's just that kind of joke. If I think of one, I'll bring it up, but I think we're good here. I failed the memory test on this one.
Well, that's okay. That's just to encourage people to go watch episodes of the show, which can be found online.
Yeah, this show is, if you watch it from beginning to end, you'll get a good glimpse of what I mean by the jokes got progressively more intricate.
Yeah.
The subtle
you have
humor,
to, otherwise it just gets repetitive. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just amazing.
That's the thing. That's one of the things about having like a stable of running gags, is that you can start mixing the running gags either together or into new jokes, and it gives you a springboard, right? Like, just from a writing perspective, if you have a running gag that's been going on throughout a certain period of time, you can add something to that, and because the person, the viewer or the reader knows that there's this running gag regarding this particular thing, they're kind of primed for the next joke.
Yeah, it's and the thing is, the way that they keep giving you these jokes, and you get to see them evolve over time, there's never a dull moment. You're like, you see the same joke, and you're just like, you're happy every time you see it, because, oh, they did it again, and they did it even better this time.
Right.
Oh, geez, there were a lot of good jokes in that camping episode too.
Well, there were apparently multiple camping episodes.
Were there?
Because I saw one. Episode 1, or series 1, episode 2 was a camping episode.
Yeah, wasn't that the one where there was the storm and they did the campfire thing where they had Mr. Rumbold playing the accordion, and They all kind of sang a song and then they got ready for bed.
Yeah, maybe, but I feel like some of the other characteristics that you described were not from that episode, but I guess I could be wrong.
All right, well, lay it on me. What happened in this camping episode that you saw?
Well, the main thing was that Mrs. Slocum wouldn't let Mrs. Brahms into her tent.
I know. Okay, that is the one I'm thinking of. There was actually another episode where Mrs. Slocum's house was being fixed for some reason.
Yeah.
And so she couldn't stay at home, so they agreed to let her stay at one of the storage floors, and they kind of set it up for her to resemble a house.
Mm-hmm.
But for some reason, all of the other characters had a reason to not be able to go home. They all missed the train or something. And so every single one of them came up and just like ruined it for her. She had the whole floor to herself, and I believe it was Mr. Humphreys first. And it was funny because she, he's supposed to be the one that everyone knows is gay, but for some reason, Mrs. Slocum decided to try and seduce him in that episode. Up until, I believe, Miss Brahms showed up next. And so she had to put the kibosh on that.
Uh-huh. Well, the other thing is that the episode you're talking about where there's a storm that kept them all in the store, the one that I saw was it was a traffic strike or something.
Yeah, you know what? That is the camping one probably. I think there was another one where a storm happened and it didn't make them stay overnight. It just meant they had to stay late or something. But yeah, I remember the traffic thing. Yeah, that must have been the camping episode then. But yeah, the one where they're sharing the tent, that was the one I was referring to. That I'm pretty sure that's the one where Miss Brahms makes the comment about sleeping naked and being the first one rescued.
Yeah, maybe. Somehow I don't remember that joke, but fair enough.
There's
anyway,
there's just it's all over the place. They do a lot of really good and creative episodes. There's an episode where they do a fire safety thing. That's the one where they're trying to steal money from the Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
That show opens with this Saudi Arabian prince showing up, and he's trying to buy good slacks.
Okay.
And they're having trouble making the sale, not because they can't. A slight communication issue. He's got an interpreter speaking for him, and they're having a bit of a culture clash. And he's trying to trade slacks, he's trying to pay for slacks by offering them a goat. And Captain Peacock, being the only one that had any experience in the desert in the military, he has to be the one to approach them and explain that they can't take a goat as payment. And so they sit down on the floor to discuss it. And it gets to the point where they offer one of the prince's wives to pay for the slacks, and they have her get up and dance. And I think Mr. Lucas is the character that says, "Oh, we could keep her in the canteen. It'd be a real treat for during our breaks or something like that." He makes a joke about how they should totally take the offer that they're being offered now.
Yeah.
It's just it's one of those classic funny culture shock moments. There's a scene where a fire actually does break out, and the Arabic prince is still there. And he had been trying to pay way too much money for these pants. He had a suitcase full of money, and he was just handing money over. And Captain Peacock had to stop him, be like, "No, just one of these would be enough. Just one of these bills is enough to pay for that." And then the fire breaks out, and you've got Mr. Humphreys and Mr. Lucas are on the floor with the briefcase, counting the money out and saying, "One for us, one for them, one for..." And then one of the interpreters walks over and pulls a scimitar and holds it in front of them. And so they start going, "All for them, none for us." All for them. It really did a good job of taking like every aspect that you can think of and having no fears about, making cross-cultural jokes. It really is a show that more people should aspire to, because it doesn't take too much seriously and anyone can enjoy it. And quite frankly, if anyone finds that show offensive, they need to lie down and probably some lithium. Even the episode where they're talking
lithium,
about
arsenic, something like that. One of the elements on the periodic table.
Take your pick. At this point, I'm not sure I care which. They do an episode with with a Japanese customer who can't pronounce things right. And so once again, Captain Peacock has to try and interpret. It has one of my favorite jokes of all time.
Mm-hmm.
They're he's trying to explain how he's going to pay, and Captain Peacock says, or no, the customer is trying to say Mr. Lucas's name, and he keeps saying Rucus, and Lucas keeps saying, no, it's Lucas, Lou, and he can't get him to pronounce it right. Captain Peacock comes over and says, Mr. Lucas, you have to understand that this man is Japanese. He has a little bit of trouble getting his tongue around his R's. And
Right.
Mr. Humphries is standing in the background, and his eyes just go wide, and then it cuts to a full shot of him, and he goes, oh, that could be a really useful skill in some situations. And then it cuts back to Captain Peacock. So it's just, rolling one joke into another. They never really miss a beat. That particular episode was one where they found out that Mr. Humphries was a relatively accurate palm reader, but there was always some downside to his palm readings. And so everyone becomes convinced that there's like two people that are going to get a promotion, but the vision that he had does end up playing out, but not in the way everyone expected. And it's a bit more literal than what they all interpreted it as.
Sure.
They never failed to come up with new situations that were interesting. Like, it's not just a sitcom where everyone's in a department store. They do things that are a bit outreaching like that, where someone's a palm reader today, and someone had this happen to them today, and someone has this background that we never heard before, and so it's going to cause the funny thing that happens in the show. And it just keeps going and going and going, and they get 8 seasons out of the show, and it never stopped entertaining me. Like, I don't think any of that show, the official original show, I don't think there's any part of it that I'm like, yeah, this sucked. I think it was genuinely, there might have been like 1 or 2 episodes that were more boring than the rest, but none of it sucked that I can remember. And I don't even think that Are You Being Served Again or Grace and Favor, whatever it was called, I don't think that had any episodes that really sucked either. It wasn't as good as the original show maybe, but it had the same style and sense of humor. They brought back Mr. Lucas to join and work on the farm after he'd been off of the show for like 6 seasons.
Right.
And then they made the new one, and it just, Captain Peacock was almost like an exposition engine for what was going on in the store in that show. And so a lot of things were trying to be explained to the audience in the space of the half an hour pilot. And so they didn't really have time to set anything up so that they could knock it down later on. It was all half setups, and everything was lying flat when they got there.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know. I guess we meant to talk about the remake a little more, but I guess
there's not much to say other than it was bad.
It was bad. It was boring. It made me just want to go back and rewatch the entire old show again to wash the taste.
I don't believe I laughed. I believe I chuckled once during the remake episode, and I got pretty seriously good laughs. Maybe 1 or 2 per episode of the other ones that I watched.
Yeah.
And there was always kind of a undercurrent of amusement with the actual main show, whereas I found myself a little bit like,
when does it end for the new one?
When does it end? Yeah, for the remake. So
yeah, the dialogue was poor. They drove a lot of the jokes into the ground by repeating them or overemphasizing them.
Right.
They had Mrs. Slocum return to the store covered in essentially feces, and that was supposed to be funny. Literally taking one of the most interesting characters in the show. Not that they're not all interesting, but a lot of people would probably say either Mrs. Slocum or Mr. Humphries are their favorite characters in the show.
Sure.
And they were 2 of the characters that were there the entire time. So they, well-warranted placement. And it's kind of disheartening to see that nobody seems to have that ability that works in television these days, or they just don't really put any serious effort into finding writers that know how to write these jokes and combining them with directors that know how to time these things and actors that can deliver in a sensible fashion.
Yeah.
I feel like having tried to watch British comedies recently, I feel like there's not really that many good comedians in Britain these days. And I mean, I'm sure there are, but they're not the ones that are getting any television time. And
probably not, yeah.
The writers, like maybe they have some good ideas, but they don't. I think they're all inexperienced. Like either that or they haven't written comedy before. And it's just like, oh, this guy's been writing a long time and we need to make a comedy. Let's let him do it. And maybe it's not a comedy writer. And I don't think it's far-fetched to think that, because we've already been through how Doctor Who's writers were at one point all soap opera writers, and the show sucked after that. So
yeah.
It's not unreasonable to assume the people trying to write comedy are just going back and watching the old show and saying, oh, people laughed at this. We'll throw these jokes in there, and no sense of how to make them funny.
Right,
there were no real intricate setups in that pilot episode, and that was kind of.
They didn't have time, right? It was the single episode as a quote unquote pilot, and in addition to that, they packed too many things into one, 25-minute show.
Yeah, and it ruined the experience and the idea that they would ever get it off the ground without. I mean, that ideally, when you make a pilot like that, you have to show what the show is going to do. You have to say, okay, we're going to do the intricate joke setups and ending setups that the old show had, and it's all going to come around at the end to the big final amusing thing that always happens, and then that'll sell people on the show. It'll get them interested, and then the BBC will be like, oh, people want to see this. Let's give it a budget and let's make more episodes. But there was no way. There was absolutely no way. At least not in, what'd you say, 2016?
Yeah.
Yeah, so 3 years after that, they would have had 4 seasons of that show, no matter how badly it had performed. Because, I mean, geez, they're still doing Doctor Who. It looks like it might finally die. It might finally be at end stage Doctor Who.
Yeah.
It's just, there's a complete lack of, not necessarily ability, but cohesion in the studio process these days. And since we're here to talk about writing, I think it warrants looking at this. Like, you can be a great writer and write a good synopsis for a sitcom and just have it totally ruined by directors who don't understand how to fit the jokes together, how to do the timing, and actors who don't know how to deliver the lines.
Yeah.
I've seen it happen before, and I've seen some examples where at first I was like, some of this is really, really bad, but then I compare it to what's out now and I go back and watch. Oh, okay, a good example. There's an animated version of the Terry Pratchett book, Weird Sisters. And it basically covers very fully delivers the entire book to you. But there were a lot of places where the way the lines were delivered, it ruined the jokes. It was much different than you would have read it in your head if you were reading the book.
Sure.
And for years, I felt like, okay, so it wasn't that great, so nothing special. But then I went back and watched it one day. And, now I'm comparing it to a lot of things that are around now. It's just like, maybe some of the delivery wasn't the greatest, but overall, it got the job done. It told the story right. And it did. I think, like, Terry Pratchett is pretty famous for the humor. But I feel like even though they didn't land the humor as accurately as they could have,
yeah,
they did it well enough to where it didn't intrude upon getting the story told. And because there were things that it's all cheaper animation. It was, it looks like it's done in Flash or something when you're watching it. It predates a lot of the software that people were using to make cartoons for the past couple decades. So it was obviously done with computers, but with software that was a lot harder to get animation done with.
Sure.
Or either that, or they were using hand-drawn animation and really, really like Hanna-Barbera some parts of it. I mean, it looks better than a Hanna-Barbera cartoon for sure. But you can kind of tell when you're watching some arm movements and things. It really looks almost computery or really poorly cell worked.
Yeah.
And the lines they would go over, some of them you'd be like, if you'd read the book, you're catching it all. And if you hadn't read the book,
sure,
you might be missing a joke or two because you're interpreting it differently in your head than what the show is presenting it as. So you're ready for it, and then you see it happen, and you're like, oh, it kind of like drives you nuts. Anyone that didn't read the book, they probably missed that joke, and so you can't really use this as something to show to someone and show them how good Terry Pratchett's books are. However, when I went back and watched it, I was like, but I can still show this to someone, and it's enough to sell people on Terry Pratchett, just this show alone, if they like it.
Okay.
And
Fair
it got
enough.
better over time. They made those movies, like The Hogfather, very accurately portrayed a lot of what happened in the books. And they delivered on the humor, too. They landed the lines and jokes a lot better in that.
Okay.
We can... I don't know if we already talked about any of those. We might have
I
done...
don't think so, no.
I thought we did an episode on Going Postal.
We did an episode on Terry Pratchett in general.
Did we? Oh, I mean, we can
so.
always go over the movies at some point. They were
Sure.
fantastic. Like when I first watched, what was the first one? I think The Hogfather was the first one. It was either that or The Color of Magic.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time around, I was like, oh, I mean, it had a bit more of a budget, and it might not have been. I mean, they were all theatrical release worthy. Although people probably would have gone to the theater and been like, this is a bit low budget for what I'm used to by today's standards.
Yeah.
It was not one of those $300 million endeavors. Nonetheless, especially with Going Postal, you can sit down and watch that movie and be like, this would have been amazing to see in theaters. Like these are movies that should have been put in theaters and advertised like crazy, because they would have made so much money compared to the slop that was out at the time that these movies were put out.
Yeah.
It might have been a hard sell for the American audience that's looking for the big budget films, but given the starvation we were going through for good movies at the time, I'm not so sure it would have been that hard of a sell.
Sure.
But it all does come back to the writing. You want to make a new show, especially this idea that they can't land these old properties the way they used to hit. It is a matter of the writers and the people working on the show not really being a cohesive unit. Because a lot of the times, one hand doesn't know what the other's doing in these situations, whereas when they made those shows in the 70s and 80s, that was a team of people that were coming in and working on it every day and had a vested interest in everyone making sure the show ran smoothly. And they had great actors who knew how to deliver a line. They probably all went over them to make sure that they had the delivery down behind the scenes. I mean, there was that instance where the Prime Minister of England sat down with what's his name? The guy that plays Sir Humphrey Appleby in Yes Minister.
Yeah.
And with the minister himself, they came in and sat down with Margaret Thatcher, and they did a reading of an episode, a little skit that she wrote based on that show, where they were kind of making fun of economists. And they delivered the lines great, and so did Margaret Thatcher, come to think of it. And it's just like, these people knew what they were doing. That's what their job was, and they took it seriously. They weren't just like, well, I mean, I can basically do what I want, and then if people don't like it, I'm just going to say that they have something personal against me and they hate me, and they're just people that are just trying to bring everyone down. Whereas these older actors, it's like, no, I'm here to entertain these people. I need to take what the writers have given me, and I need to understand how it's supposed to be presented so that people will laugh at it or be entertained by it. And one of the jobs as a writer is to make that clear to anyone who reads it. Like, you don't sit down and read a Terry Pratchett book and not understand how the flow of a joke is supposed to go.
Yeah.
Unless you're like slow reading it out loud without paying attention to the words rolling out of your mouth. As you read it, you understand what makes the jokes funny, where the pauses are supposed to be, how the characters are saying things. And it's because he's a good writer who knows how to present the words in a way that people will interpret in their head as the proper pronunciation by however you're picturing the characters in your mind.
Yeah.
And a good scriptwriter has to be able to do the same thing, probably even better, because you have to filter it through another human being before it gets to the intended audience.
Right.
Possibly, too, because you have to take the director into account, and the director should have the sense to sit back and say, that line read was terrible, nobody's going to get it, we need to do that again. And I feel like people just aren't doing that job. That's the job. That comes with the territory. So now that I've rambled for like 40 minutes, what are your thoughts? What do you think? Where do we end up here with Are You Being Served?
I mean, I think it's something worth going to check out if you like British, sitcoms. I'm certainly going to see if I can't poke a few more episodes myself and, get a better feel for the show, but it definitely seems like it's got something to it. It's one of those things where having only seen like 3 episodes or so, it's kind of hard to really get into it. But at the same time, there's definitely some good points to it that I think are worth looking at it a little bit more. So,
well, my closing thoughts on it, I guess, would just be that
it's a TV show. Watch it.
It's an entertaining show that maybe you had to be there for it to really understand. If you aren't, if it sounds like something that isn't interesting, you got to kind of think that the way this show was presented, this was at a time when you had what was on cable TV and not much more, and even not so much like
not even cable TV. It was all broadcast at this point.
It kind of was. There was cable TV at the time, but it didn't have as much stuff. Cable didn't have as much.
Not in '72.
Well, not in '72, but like, okay, so I'm giving my perspective of in the '80s when I first started watching it.
Sure.
It was on PBS, and there was cable at the time, but for the most part, what was on cable, there was a couple of good programs maybe, and you never really had a choice of what to watch. And so when that show would come on the weekends on PBS, it was a genuinely good show that outclassed anything else that I would be watching at the time. And so I loved watching it. I looked forward to watching it whenever I could catch it every week as a kid.
Sure.
And to understand that you have a lot of choices nowadays where you can find all these different things, it doesn't necessarily hurt to go back and check out something older like that and see where a lot of things might have came from, and how good a show can be at a time when they didn't have the ability to solve any problem that a show might present with, just computer graphics or something. Another thing that
right.
I think one more thing warrants pointing out. They did a lot of jokes with contraptions in this show, where they would have a like a mannequin or some kind of presentation for a product that would have some funny side effect. I remember in one case there was a dummy that had a bra that it would demonstrate by, it would move it back and forth, and at one point there's balloons inside of it, and something went wrong with the wiring where they just kept expanding and getting bigger and bigger and bigger until the bra snapped. And there were a lot of there was a dummy of young Mr. Grace that they were going to put up by the elevators, and the dummy had a voice recording in it, and you would turn it on, and kind of animatronic, it would keep repeating, "Welcome to my store, welcome to my store," and the arm would move up, grab the hat, and tip the hat, and then it would put the hat back on, and then it started to kind of glitch out at one point, and they're all watching this thing, and it's going, "Welcome to my store, welcome to my store," and it grabs the brim of its hat, pulls its whole head off, and tips the head down, and then replaces the head.
Okay.
So it's it did a lot of things that at the time it was the Home Improvement of its time, practically, because Home Improvement was a show that did a lot of things with, displays and gadgets like that. They made
that's a good point. Yeah.
A lot of gags like that. I mean, I can't think of another British comedy off the top of my head that had a lot of those mechanical gags that they would use. Fawlty Towers didn't really use any. Keeping Up Appearances didn't.
Mr. Bean did sometimes.
Yeah, well, Mr. Bean didn't just do that. Mr. Bean also had ridiculous situations where Rowan Atkinson would... I don't know if you ever saw the episode where he was brushing his teeth in his car and climbing on the outside of his car while it was driving. He did some hilarious stuff with just any given prop. And, once again, it's the... that old 70s, 80s, and 90s British humor. I'll take that over the American humor of the time any day. Not these days, obviously, but back then it was a science for them, and I loved it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's an episode.
I think we did Are You Being Served good.
We did indeed. So
go get served. Oh no, you didn't make the joke.
Get served.
You didn't make the joke.
Well, no, that's the joke's gonna be the title.
Oh, shoot. Don't cut this out.
Yeah. Okay. So the title for this episode, which you've seen because you looked at the episode before you clicked on it, is "Are You Being Sieved?" And the reason being that, like, you need to separate the good from the bad. And the bad is the 2016 episode.
Yeah,
something like that.
There's a lot of wheat in the show, and the new show was nothing but chaff.
Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we will be back next week, hopefully, with something else. God knows what. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I am Junior Assistant Justin.
And we will see you all next time.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.